We apologize for any delay. We've had a little bit of problem with Zoom today. We are very pleased that you're here, and we have attendees from across the state of Wisconsin and beyond, and our thanks to you for joining us today. My name is Peter Hughes, and I'll be serving as your program manager today, along with our behind the scenes program manager group. And my job will be to try to keep us on track today, and we'll probably have to speed a few things up here because of the delay. Before we begin today's program, a few notes. Our program sponsors today are Democracy Found, the Great Rivers United Way, La Crosse Tribune, La Crosse LeaderEthics-Wisconsin, the League of Women Voters of the La Crosse area, and WIZM Radio. And today's virtual sponsors are Festival Foods, LeaderEthics-Wisconsin, Roger and Kenna Christians, Joe and Pat Heim, Tom Houlihan, and Sally Lister, and we appreciate all of them for their support. Our program today will be live streaming on our program sponsors' Facebook sites. We are accepting sponsors for future virtual events to help defray our event cost, and you can contact Lee Roush at LeaderEthics-Wisconsin for more information. And if you're interested in becoming a member, please check out our website at LeaderEthics-Wisconsin, Wisconsin with a W-I at the end.org. You've been muted upon entry to the conference and will remain so throughout the presentation. This will minimize background noise and will optimize the experience. Once our featured speaker, Katherine Gehl, has finished her remarks, our moderator, Rusty Cunningham, will conduct a conversation with our presenter and accept questions from the audience. If you have a question, please place it in the chat function, which we will be monitoring. So to kick things off, I'd like to introduce today's moderator, Rusty Cunningham. Rusty Cunningham is a fourth-generation award-winning journalist. He joined the La Crosse Tribune as editor in 1997. He has served as executive editor of River Valley Media and 12 years as its publisher, before retiring after 43 years in journalism in October 2020. He continues to serve on the newspaper's editorial board. Rusty, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Peter. As our guest today points out in her new book, people who care about lawmaking and enjoy sausage have long known that they shouldn't witness either being made. But with the divisive state of politics these days, we need to be careful not to offend the sausage makers. It's clear that politics must change in order to preserve democracy and find solutions to the challenges facing our country and our world. She argues that those changes won't come from political parties. They must come from voters. We're honored today to have a guest who brings hope for change. Katherine M. Gehl is a business leader, entrepreneur, author, and speaker. She is founder of the Institute for Political Innovation and co-founder of Democracy Found in Wisconsin, focused on leading modern political change in America with Final Five voting. She has co-authored the book, The Politics Industry, How Political Innovation Can Break Partisan Gridlock and Save Our Democracy. Her book is an inspiring read that provides a blueprint for how voters can regain control of the political process to solve problems and better serve our future in true democratic fashion. She was formerly president and CEO of Gehl Foods, a $250 million high-tech food manufacturer. She holds degrees from Notre Dame, Catholic University, and Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management. She splits her time between Wisconsin and Illinois with her two children. Katherine, welcome and thanks for joining us today.
Rusty, thank you so much. Thank you to Lee and Peter. I am just thrilled to be here. And I have to say that I'm in a super good mood. For one, because I just had I'm going to call it the first frozen custard of the spring season, even though it didn't feel springy last night, from my favorite place, because I know we all have our favorite places. Okay, so I am going to use about 20 minutes, everyone, to give an overview of what has come to be called politics industry theory. It's basically thinking about what it takes to win in politics and what it takes to solve problems in politics and how those things, aren't connected and how could we connect them. And that'll get us all on the same page, but then we can spend the rest of our time on Q&A. So here goes. I should tell you guys, I talk about this all around the country for the past 3 years. And I like to tell people across the nation that everything I know about politics, I learned from cheese. Because as Rusty just said, in the last decade of my business career, I was running a food manufacturing company in Germantown, actually a little north of Milwaukee. And we did make cheese, and you have no idea how happy this makes people around the country when they hear that my business in Wisconsin had something to do with cheese. It really tickles them. So I use that to start off, which is to say I really did learn about politics from cheese. Let's look at it this way. In my business, if customers liked my cheese, I did well. And if they didn't, they bought cheese from someone else and I did less well. Essentially, healthy competition incentivizes businesses to make better products. Better products equals happier customers, and happier customers equals successful businesses. It's win-win. Now, while I was running my company, I was also deeply engaged in and increasingly frustrated with politics. And the more frustrated I got, the more I wondered why competition in politics wasn't delivering the same kind of win-win results that we get in business from competition. And so this question came up: how do the Democrats and the Republicans keep doing so well when their customers, that's us, the citizens, have never been more dissatisfied? Why is the politics industry win-lose? They win and we are losing. The answer: it turns out that the one thing almost all Americans today agree on, which is Washington is broken, is also the one thing we're really all a little bit wrong about. Washington isn't broken. It's doing exactly what it's designed to do. It's just not designed to serve us, the citizens, the public interest. Most of the rules in politics are designed and continuously fine-tuned by and for the benefit of private gain-seeking organizations. And those are our two political parties. They're really a textbook duopoly. And for their surrounding companies in the industry of politics. And they, in this industry of politics, are all doing great, even as the American public has never been less happy. Said another way, politics isn't broken, it's fixed. If I could hear you, hopefully someone was laughing at that. It usually works. Okay, this idea is a guiding principle of politics industry theory, which is the nonpartisan body of work that I originated and have been championing over the last 7 years. Now, before I go further, I want to just share with you guys that I'm not on the blue team. I'm not on the red team. I actually started to call myself a number of years ago politically homeless, and that may resonate with some of you as well. And my work doesn't focus blame on individual politicians on either side of the duopoly. That's because the root cause of our political dysfunction, the cause that endures across all election cycles and administrations, is the system, the rules of the game. The rules of the game in politics are even making prisoners, in a sense, of our senators and representatives, because their only option is lockstep allegiance to their side of the divide. So what do we do about it? How do we change the game to free our Congress and make politics win-win? We change the rules. But which ones? It's not what we think. It's actually not gerrymandering, not the Electoral College, not the absence of term limits, not even money in politics, really. By looking at the system through this lens of competition, politics industry theory identifies the two rules that are both our biggest obstacles and our biggest opportunities, and they've been hiding in plain sight. So I want to start with bad rule number 1, and that is party primaries. You all know primaries, you know, those first round elections that most of us actually really ignore, the ones that determine the single Republican and the single Democrat who can appear on the November general election ballot. Party primaries have become low turnout elections dominated by highly ideological voters and special interests. And candidates know that the only way to make it to the general election ballot is to win the favor of these more extreme partisans in the primary. So candidates from both parties have little choice but to move towards the extremes. Now, why does this matter? Because it affects dramatically actually governing, and not in a good way. So imagine for a moment that you're a member of Congress and you're deciding how to vote on a bipartisan bill that addresses a critical national challenge. You might ask yourself, is this a good idea? Is this what the majority of my constituents want? But that's not how it works in the politics industry. Instead, the question that matters the most to you is, will I win my next party primary if I vote for this bill? And the answer is almost always no. Consensus solutions don't win party primaries, which means they can't work together. So let's illustrate this key design flaw with a Venn diagram. In the current system, there's actually no connection, no intersection between Congress acting in the public interest and the likelihood that those senators and representatives will get reelected. In other words, if our representatives do their jobs the way we want and need them to, they're likely to lose those jobs. And that's crazy. It's a crazy design. No wonder Congress really isn't getting things done. Okay, now I want to talk about bad rule. That's party primaries, bad rule number 1. Now I want to talk about bad rule number 2. And that is plurality voting, which I'm going to explain in a minute. But let me back up for a moment. In any other industry as big and as thriving with this much revenue and profits, et cetera, to be had as politics, with this much customer dissatisfaction and only 2 companies in the industry, some entrepreneur would see a phenomenal business opportunity and come into the market and create a new competitor to give the customers what they want. But that doesn't happen in politics. Our current parties don't feel competitive pressure to serve the public interest, in large part because of one rule that keeps out almost all new competition, and that is plurality voting. It sounds kind of fancy, but it simply means the candidate with the most votes wins. And it seems logical, but it's a really bad idea. The reason is that because of plurality voting in the United States, you can win almost all elections, even if a majority of the voters didn't vote for you. So for example, in a 3-way race, the winner could have only 34% of the vote, with 66% of the voters splitting between the other 2 candidates, meaning most people wanted someone other than the winner. With plurality voting, we may not vote for the candidate we really want because we're afraid that we'll just waste our vote, or because we might spoil the election. So if you think back, I want to give you an example of how this plays out in real life. If you think back to the 2016 presidential race, voters on the right who liked libertarian candidate Gary Johnson were essentially told by the Republicans, you know, it's fine to like Gary Johnson, but don't actually vote for the guy because you'll just take votes away from Trump and you'll help elect Hillary. And voters on the left who liked Green Party candidate Jill Stein were told the same thing. Oh, fine to like Jill Stein, but even though this is a democracy, don't actually vote for the person you like because she's just a spoiler. She'll take votes away from Hillary and help elect Trump. The spoiler problem is the single biggest reason almost nobody outside the duopoly ever runs or gets any traction, because everyone knows that they don't stand a chance. Politics, if you think about it, is the only industry where we in America are regularly told that less competition is better for us as customers. And if there's never any new competition, the existing parties simply aren't accountable to us for results because they don't need us to like what they're doing. They only need us to choose them as the lesser of two evils, or to just stay home. Now, the founders foresaw our situation, and they warned us, as when John Adams said, and I quote, "There is nothing which I dread so much as a division of the Republic into two great parties, each arranged under its leader and concerting measures in opposition to each other." Now, I want to say there's nothing inherently wrong with parties or even having only two major ones. The problem is that the current two are guaranteed to remain the only two, regardless of what they do or don't get done on our behalf for the country. This is definitely not the best we can do. So thankfully, the founders gave us what they knew we'd need. They gave us, this. This is, I don't know if you can see it, this is my pocket constitution. And it's short, that's why it fits in the pocket. And guess what's not in here? Instructions on how to run our elections. Crazy, unhelpful rules like party primaries, like plurality voting. They've been, made up since this. But thanks to what is in the Constitution, Article 1, those rules are optional, because Article 1 gives the states the power to change these rules of election to Congress at any time. And personally, I and the people that work with me, et cetera, and more Wisconsinites are thinking that now is like exactly the right time when we should change those rules. So here's where we turn nonpartisan politics industry theory into action. The political innovation that I recommend that we are working on is called Final Five voting. With Final Five voting, we make two simple changes to our elections for Congress. We get rid of what doesn't work, which is party primaries and plurality voting, and we replace them with what will work, open top five primaries and instant runoffs in the general election. So I want to explain these changes with an example of using Final Five voting in a hypothetical and kind of cool election. And I will tell you, we didn't make up these election results. We actually ran this election at a Milwaukee meeting with, I don't remember if it was like 150 people. And the point of the election was, who is the favorite sports team of this audience? So think about it this way. Now you're sitting there and you're going to vote. This is the primary election. These are all your Wisconsin sports team choices. Now, immediately you notice how diverse this field is. It's pretty exciting. You really want to actually vote in this primary. It seems worth turning out. So because this is an open primary, all the candidates, all these sports teams are on the same ballot. There's not a Republican primary or a Democrat primary. Everybody who votes in the primary, everybody who runs in the primary is on the same ballot. You go in, you pick your favorite, whether it's a Democrat, whether it's a Republican, whether it's independent, a green. Now, polls close, we tally the votes, and the top five finishers in the primary election advance to the general election. We're not just advancing one Republican and one Democrat. So now the top five move on, and you see what they are right here. Now it's the general election in November, and you go to the polls, and this is how your ballot looks. And I fill it out according to my preferences. So my first choice is the Packers. My second choice is the Bucks. The third choice, Brewers, et cetera, all the way to my fifth choice being the Admirals. And everybody gets to do the same thing. But no worries, you're never worse off than you are now. If you want to, you only need pick one. You can rank as many or as few as you want. Now the polls close and we tally the votes, and let's look at those. This is where things get interesting and you see how this can work. If this election were held under plurality voting and we counted these votes, the Milwaukee Bucks would win because they have 30% of the first choice votes. But because we're now going to use instant runoff voting, we're looking for which of these 5 candidates has the broadest support amongst the most voters. So 30% doesn't get you to the win. Therefore, what we do is we drop the candidate who came in last place, and then voters who had selected that candidate, which was the Milwaukee Forward, the soccer team, have their single vote transferred to their next choice candidate who's still in the race. So in this case, it happened to turn out that all the people who had selected the soccer team, their second choice was the Brewers, their votes moved there. Now we actually see the Brewers have pulled ahead of the Bucks, but we still don't have a winner because nobody is the broadest support, over 50%. So we continue this process, dropping the last place candidate and moving the voters who had selected that candidate have their next choice counted. Everybody is always only voting once. This is really like a series of runoffs, but instead of having to keep physically coming back for another election, you just cast all your votes at once. And when the runoff is over, it turns out that the Green Bay Packers pull ahead and they win the election with 52% of the vote. Final 5 voting is our name for the combination of top 5 primaries and instant runoff general elections. We've got to change both of these rules at the same time because it's how they work in combination that really transforms the incentives in politics. The ultimate purpose of final 5 voting isn't necessarily to change who wins. It's to change what the winners are incented to do and what they have the freedom to do on behalf of their constituents. So remember our initial Venn diagram where we said in the current rules of elections, there's no connection between people acting between our representatives acting in the public interest and getting reelected. Now, with final 5 voting, there is a connection. We've created this overlap, which is to say the best way to get reelected under final 5 voting is to enact legislation that appeals to the broad majority of the constituents in your district instead of just to the narrow, more partisan interests of 10% of people who turn out for party primaries. So the message of Congress now is do your job or lose your job. Innovate, reach across the aisle whenever it's helpful and come up with real solutions to our problems and new opportunities for progress, or be guaranteed healthy competition in your next election. Final 5 voting gives voters more choice, more voice, and most importantly, the likelihood of these better results. I actually call it sometimes free market politics, because it can deliver the best of what healthy competition delivers in well-regulated industries, which is innovation, results, and accountability. Now, I want to say something else. I don't want you to think that this is really some kind of naive overpromise of what's possible in government politics. I want to clarify that I agree with Winston Churchill, who is known for having said that democracy is the worst form of government out there, except when compared with all the others. Democracy is messy and hard. But what we have now is messy, hard, and bad results to show for it. with final five voting, we'll have messy and hard, but we'll have some good results to show for all of that messy and hard. And perhaps the most amazing part of this whole effort is that final five voting isn't just powerful in increasing the likelihood that Congress can solve national problems, it's actually achievable. We can make it happen. And we now have proof. So back in 2017, I published my first work on this through Harvard Business School. And the report that I published made its way to Alaska, where a gentleman named Scott Kendall read it and saw this idea of top 4 or 5 primaries plus instant runoff voting general elections as ideal for Alaska. And he designed a ballot measure, which they can do in Alaska, where people actually, the citizens get to vote on whether they change the rules. And that ballot measure went to the voters in November of 2020, and they passed it. So Alaska has become the first state in the nation to change these rules, but they won't be the last. In fact, for us in Wisconsin, something really exciting happened in the past couple of weeks. We had bipartisan legislation introduced in Madison for final five voting. So we have over 20 co-sponsors, but our lead sponsors are, for example, Republican Senator Dale Kuinga and Republican Representative Tony Kurtz, and Democratic Senator Jeff Smith and Democratic Representative Danny Reamer. It's an amazing bipartisan agreement that this is the difference we need to make, and we have the opportunity to make right here in Wisconsin in a way that affects what Washington, D.C. can do. And of course, since I'm talking to so many people from La Crosse, I'm excited to say that the La Crosse Tribune's editorial board editorialized this effort and said that they fully support it. I co-founded Democracy Found in Wisconsin with a colleague of mine, Austin Ramirez, another Wisconsin CEO, back in 2017. And today on the call, we have our fabulous executive director, Sarah Eskrich. So if some of you end up being interested, Sarah would be a person that would want to work with you. She's amazing. And we have been working now for these multiple years to get this message out to people across the state and find agreement. And that's happening in a completely bipartisan way. In closing, I'll just note that I think that so many of us might have this feeling that I do, which is, you know, how devastating it really is to come to terms with how little we've really come to expect from our politics. We think that this is normal. I mean, we think it's horrible, but we think it's normal. So we complain about it, but we've mostly given up believing that it's ever going to change. But this is no way to run what has been called that shining city on a hill that is America. We can choose different because our Constitution gives us the power to choose that. And I believe it also gives us the responsibility to use that power to correct our current situation. We can remake our politics when we need to, and we need to. With the greatest urgency and without fatigue, we should aggressively reclaim the enormous promise that is the great American experiment. Our American politics, and I think about that as not red politics, not blue politics, but our American politics. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Rusty.
Katherine, that was terrific. I love your description of being politically homeless. I have to ask, what motivated you to take on this challenge of setting politics on a better course? I mean, there are such pursuits as golf, which has become called a good walk spoiled, but at least with golf, there's fresh air. Not a whole lot of that in politics. So what got you on this path?
Okay, I'm a really bad golfer, really, really bad. not an option. But what got me on this path is a combination of personal belief, like my life story. And specifically what I mean by that is that I lost my mother when I was 23 years old and she was only 46. My brother was 11. You know, it was just someone gone too soon. And one of the things that's never left me about that is this feeling that life is short. So when I was running my company, I loved it. I had 350 employees, fabulous team of people. It was so great. And yet, as I looked forward, you know, I'm getting older all the time. And I have 2 children and I'm seeing, you know, what's happening in the country and everything. And basically you have to make choices. And so I think a lot out of that life is short idea, I thought, I can't do everything. And I'd better try to work on what is really my highest use that would have, you know, maybe a broader, well, not just maybe, that would, if we're successful, and I mean all of us who decide to move on changing our politics, that is the best impact that I could hope to be a part of making. And it just called me. It's kind of like, I'll say one more thing. Once I saw not just the problems, because we kind of all see the problems, but once I saw that there was this root cause that was the symptom, that was the cause, you know, this system, and that we could change it. And since I had never seen that before, I didn't know that. I'd been involved in politics, but that cause had been really invisible to me. Once I knew that, I couldn't unsee it. And then as I told other people about it, and then they saw it and it was illuminating to them, I just thought, I need to, you know, work on this because it's so powerful, and yet we hadn't had that movement yet.
It's very interesting to see the fallout from the voter rights legislation in Georgia. Now we're seeing more and more corporate CEOs raise a hand and say, gee, this isn't right. And yet there are politicians saying CEOs ought to stay out of politics. Interesting, given the Citizens United ruling. As someone who has served as a CEO, do you feel it is a corporate responsibility for CEOs to speak out about issues involving democracy?
I think it is every citizen's responsibility to be heard, because as is said, you know, democracy isn't something we have, it's something we do. And in the case of CEOs who have influence, they are speaking out. They're using that influence in the way they run their business and then in policy positions that they take all the time in general. So to take nonpartisan for the good of the country, not for the good of, you know, any individual company relative to any other company, I think is completely compatible with both the call to them as citizens and as leaders of their company. Because these companies exist, you know, in this great American experiment, and we all have to be a part of changing that. So yes, as a CEO, now I don't think, for example, CEOs should tell their employees how to vote or things like that. But yes, I think we should all be heard on this.
In your book, you make the analogy of the dynamic with the recently completed NCAA basketball tournament, in which millions of people fill out brackets and millions of people are betting on the underdog. But as you point out, the underdog doesn't win very often in politics. Isn't money a key factor in that?
Money is a huge determinant of who wins and of what winners do and of how the game is played, all of that. so I think what's underlying those question is not so much, isn't money, you know, a big part of the problem, but it's more like, so why don't I propose we fix money in politics? And I want to be super clear. There are many things that are problems, only some of which we know how to fix in a way that wouldn't potentially cause more problems, and only some of which we can fix, as in have the power to fix. So I'll take, for example, this question of money in politics. Many of the money in politics, many people who are focused on how to fix that want to see a constitutional amendment to get rid of Citizens United, something which may, you know, sort of ring a bell for people, which we don't need to get into, but point is they want a constitutional amendment to change something. In our divided country and divided government and politics today, I'm going to tell you my view of the possibility of getting a constitutional amendment on anything in my lifetime. It's zero. So for everybody who cares, now that I'm spending my career on this, what I want to offer to people is not things that, if this were possible, wouldn't that be great? But, oh, by the way, it's not really possible. I want to say this final five voting is the most powerful thing that's also achievable because of our Constitution and Article 1. And as a CEO, well, and just even in our own lives, I mean, we choose things that we can really make a difference in. So I'm not saying people shouldn't be concerned about that, other people, but what I think is the most opportunity is for those of us who want to see a change in a matter of years, not decades. We need to change these election rules because that's what we have access to, power over, control.
I have a couple questions before we turn it over to Peter, who's keeping track of some of the group questions.
Oh, great.
But one of the things that you emphasize in the book is that political reform has succeeded before, from the Gilded Age to muckrakers to Wisconsin's Fighting Bob Follett. Do you think that kind of reform is possible? And what can members of the audience today do to make a difference?
You know, as I just noted, I talked about things that were powerful and achievable. This is achievable. So sometimes I draw another Venn diagram, you know, so I have two circles and I say it's powerful and it's achievable and they overlap. And then I used to put up a third one, which is sort of easy, which is to say there isn't anything I can give you powerful and achievable, but it can't give you powerful, achievable, and easy. So it is hard to change the rules. So there are two ways to change the rules in the country. One is the way Alaska did it, which is have an initiative on the ballot where people vote. Like, people are familiar when you have to vote whether you want to raise taxes in your school district, and you vote, you know, yes or no on that referendum. So in other states, not in Wisconsin, you can do that for things like final five voting. So in Wisconsin, our only option is for the legislature to pass a bill and the governor to sign it, which means that we get to go ask our senators and assembly representatives to pass this bill. We get to tell them that this is what we would like for them to do because they represent us. And we get to make it an issue in the next gubernatorial race that we're having in 2022, so that the governor elected out of that would like to sign this bill in 2023. And the best way to do that is to actually get engaged with our organization, which is democracyfound.org. And that's when I mentioned where Sarah Eskridge, if I can't really see that many people here, but she should wave. She's not on my screen, but Sarah, you know what? And Sarah, why don't you put your email and Democracy Found website in the chat? To get engaged in that organization, we need funding, we need volunteers, we need, and here's what we need the most of. Even if you don't do this through the organization, mostly we need you to tell people about this. And if I could recommend one of the best ways to do that, I have a TED Talk, which is pretty darn similar to what I just, talked to you guys about. It's 17 minutes long, and it's available online. And Sarah will put that in the chat right now. And that gives any of your friends and relatives the exact same information that you just got about what Final Five voting is and why we should do it. I really tell people all the time, it's time to talk about politics with all of our friends and family members. And you're going to be the person who can finally bring something about politics to the table that isn't partisan, that doesn't divide the people. You might get agreement in, your whole family. I mean, you might not, okay, but lots of people across the political spectrum agree on this because it's not a Trojan horse for party advantage. And so, you can go for it. I used to, when we were still flying, so before the pandemic, I would always talk to my seatmate about this idea. And then I would grade myself, on whether from takeoff to landing, I could bring them on board. It was a very fun game. I did very well too. I need to fly again, although that's very time intensive for, one seatmate per flight, but.
It would take you a little while.
Yeah.
But you do make the case for urgency in the book. And I want to point to this quote. You talk about Americans often thinking that we're at the top of the world when it comes to quality of life factors. But this quote really makes me sit up. We are no longer the country we think we are. And you say that politics is the preeminent barrier. Isn't that the call of arms that really should make all of us just mad as hell?
Yeah, I am mad as hell. And then that recedes to the background, which is totally great because it's not very empowering to be just mad. So I'm mad, and then that goes in the background while I have then instead in front of me this sense of urgency to get these changes done. And you know how I said at the beginning of my remarks that there's one thing in the country, even as divided as we supposedly are, that people agree on, and they agree Washington is broken. But here's another thing people agree on, that they love this country.
Absolutely.
And so if you put those things together and you look around, and people may look around and believe that different policies, they think this policy would fix X and someone else thinks this policy would fix X. My experience so far is that people look around and think that connecting getting reelected with figuring out how to solve these difficult challenges where it's not entirely clear that one side should get their whole way or this side should get their whole way. They have to do what we do in our lives, which is come together on the difficult issues and negotiate and innovate and find some consensus and pay for what we do. And, and that's just the opportunity that people see. And when you take those things we agree on, that we love the country and that we think it's not working well, we're exactly in the position as Wisconsinites, as our ancestors 100 years ago were when they said, we have to get the government working again, after the excesses of the Gilded Age. So I love this. Actually, Wisconsin was a huge leader, in the progressive era. And we are one of the leaders in this by the fact that we've introduced our legislation. Now, if that's all we've done in 5 years, I'm really proud of that. And lots of people have worked on it, amazing people. If that's all we've done in 5 years, I won't be so proud, meaning we have to get it over the finish line, but we're making that progress. And with everybody here today, if you joined us and talked to your legislators and got involved with Democracy Found and sent this TED video around, you're making a huge difference. That's how it happens.
I'm dying to ask this last question, and that is, you have named a son for Teddy Roosevelt. Why?
I was pregnant with Teddy when I was writing a speech to deliver at the commencement ceremonies for La Follette School of Public Policy in Madison. And it was amazing. I got to deliver it, in the assembly from the podium. And I had to check out hospitals where I was going to go if I couldn't quite make it through the ceremony because it was right at the very end. And I hadn't picked a name for a boy's name yet. I didn't know if it was boy or girl. And in my speech, I used, it's not original to have used it, but I used the famous Teddy Roosevelt remarks about being in the arena. And that it is, being in the arena where the action is happening, and differentiating that from really being a spectator, which is commenting and often criticizing the action in the arena. And it was right before it was a couple months before I was going to release this report on the politics industry. So I was launching into my new career and knowing that, it would be very much an in the arena kind of thing. And I'm always trying to push myself into the arena and not in the stands. It's a risky, but more exhilarating way to live, I would say. And so I was talking to a friend of mine, another Wisconsinite, actually we went to preschool together, and she's now the godparent of my son. And she said, oh, well, why don't you name him Teddy? Oh my gosh, of course. And so there we go.
That's terrific.
I have to tell you one thing. I have to tell you one thing. So my
Sure.
daughter is 12 years older than Teddy. And by the way, apparently being an only child was a good gig because she was a little disappointed at his arrival. But nonetheless, she gave him, at my suggestion, this book called Who is Teddy Roosevelt? It's a little children's book about Teddy Roosevelt. And she wrote in there, to my brother, this is when she's 12, I hope you like this book. Maybe you'll be a great president, or at least a good person. So,
Can't beat it.
yeah.
That's wonderful. Katherine, thank you. Peter, over to you.
Yep. So Katherine, you have lit up the chat room. And for everyone listening, we're going to go a few minutes over because of the delay, and hopefully you'll hang in there with us. Katherine, I'm wondering if we could do a lightning round, and then we could, I'll give you the question and maybe a quick response if you feel comfortable with that.
I will do my best.
Okay.
My colleagues are looking on to see if it's possible.
The first question we got, in Arkansas, they tied the Final Five to the campaign finance laws. And the question was wondering whether or not the campaign finance laws might have driven that more than the Final Five. What is your take on that?
Oh, yeah, in Alaska, they did that. And yes, I think that helped the voters in Alaska to vote yes on it. It's not, having said that, the way that I recommend that we go. I would prefer to have Final Five voting stand on its own.
Okay, and apparently, I don't know Arkansas from Alaska on the initials, that it was Alaska. Why would current legislators introduce Final Five voting bills? What are the benefits to them? Oh,
because they love America too. I mean, these legislators in Wisconsin, it's not just the 4 people I mentioned who introduced it, it's the, I think, 22 co-sponsors that we have. Because, we can say the politicians is this or that, but I would say most of them go there with this desire to be of service. And they, if what I said today resonated with you, they see that exact same thing and they're living it. They know what those party primaries do to their ability to collaborate. They know that the party primaries push them so far apart that it takes a mountain of courage to try to find consensus. So they would do it because it's the right thing to do, and they love the country, like us. We're the same.
Another question was, what would you expect to see regarding voter turnout, either in the primary or the general elections?
So my prediction is the turnout would rise. Only after we have the data will we know by how much, but here's why. Because there are multiple reasons why people don't vote, but let's just say one of them is feeling that your vote doesn't make a difference. And in the general election, it doesn't. In 86% for Congress, in 86% of federal elections for Congress, the race was already decided in the primary. So now all the races will be decided in the general. The general is now more important than the primary. That's a super good reason to turn out. Plus, you're not going to have the same lesser of two evils choices that so many people feel. I'm not saying you never love a candidate, and I'm not saying there aren't candidates to love. I'm saying that a lot of people regularly feel it's a lesser of two evils in certain races. And so now you'll have 5 to choose from, and you can vote for the one you love without wasting your vote. So it's totally worth turning out and having your vote counted for some person's vision, and even while contributing to the election of someone, you know, that could be your second choice. It's just a much more satisfying system, and we do things that are satisfying and that are worth our time. This now makes elections totally worth our time, and we'll begin to see that. So, you know, we could have mandatory voting, but it wouldn't make that much different if we have the same system.
Okay. Another question I think is on a lot of people's minds. What will this do to the two-party system?
Yeah, so it will, first of all, I'm a big fan of parties, which is to say, in a democracy, we have to figure out how to organize ourselves, and we have to have people who are thinking through issues and finding a way to bring groups together to coalesce around issues. And so parties serve a vital purpose in democracy. I don't think there's like a number of parties that makes anything better. What I think we need is that the current 2 aren't guaranteed to keep their spots no matter how they perform. So we need to lower the barrier to competition. So it could be if you're not doing a job that people like, someone could finally compete against you. So I predict that we'll mostly over time have 2 major parties sort of at any given time, but they'll always be they have to care about the customers now, because otherwise there could be someone else.
Okay. I'm going to do one last question. Why would this not be affected by gerrymandered districts? And if one party controls a district, has a majority, can't they stack the candidate pool and then vote along their party line?
So this election will certainly still result in an election of a candidate who represents the views of the majority of people in that district. So if a district is deeply red or deeply blue, they're going to elect out of the current 2, a Republican or a Democrat, you know, I mean, meaning the Reds are going to elect a Republican. So if it's gerrymandered for Democrats or gerrymandered for Republicans, that's who's going to win. This, and by the way, we should have nonpartisan gerrymandering, but that's not in the achievable bucket. So I put it to the side. And this is more important than that, because the effect of gerrymandering is really concentrated by making the primary the only election that matters in those districts. That's one of the reasons why the primary, you know, if it's a red district, whoever won the red primary already won. But now the general election is always more important. And now Republican votes in blue districts matter, and Democrat votes in red districts matter, unless there's an overwhelming majority for one candidate, because they have to choose second choice votes, et cetera. And, you know, again, should we fix partisan gerrymandering down the road? We absolutely should, but we can change what the winners have the freedom to do and are incented to do. And we change that they're now incented to do it on behalf of their entire district, not just their party primary voters. So it's just a win-win that way.
Thank you, Katherine. We had quite a few other questions. Hopefully we can capture those and maybe pass them on to you later. I'm going to turn the program over now to our Executive Director, Lee Roush.
Thanks, Peter.
Well, I want to thank you, Katherine and Rusty, for a very thorough and engaging conversation on the issues that we're facing with our electoral process. And for those of you that are following or have followed Leader Ethics Wisconsin, you probably heard us talk about how important it is for us to encourage elected officials to follow 4 key principles: to be truthful, to be transparent with public information, to be a unifier rather than a divider, and to the best of their ability, work to represent their entire constituency, not just the simple majority that may vote for them. And these are the kinds of principles, values that are pretty much part of the expectation in our community. If you're a business leader, that's what we expect in terms of the service from that company or organization. It's what we expect of healthcare administrators or teachers. And sometimes we're disappointed, but that's clearly what our expectation is. And our position is that we want to raise that same expectation for elected officials. But here's the big challenge, and it's the information that we just heard about, that our electoral process provides significant disincentives to that. In fact, if you think about it, our campaign spending is increasing dramatically, and at the same time, the partisan divide is at a place that hasn't been in decades. There's very little room for compromise in the current format, and the trust in government is really decreased to a level where the overwhelming majority have no confidence in governmental leaders at the congressional level, and little at the state and local levels when it comes to these dynamics. And that's because the partisan divide at the national level is also filtering through the state down into local communities and institutions like education, healthcare, research. So if you look at this, the things that we're talking about, if they continue as they are continuing to get worse. And it really meets the essence of the definition of the term a vicious cycle. So what do we do about it? Well, we believe that the place to start is to have conversations just like this. Try to have this conversation in every corner of the state, in church groups, with service clubs, with business organizations. Our goal should be to try to get this information out so that it is on the street, that the average citizen understands that if we do nothing, we're not protecting the status quo. We're actually contributing to the decline of the integrity of the American democracy. And so I want to again thank you, Rusty, I want to thank you for all you have done throughout your career to promote community-based solutions on huge problems that we have to face. And Katherine, I want to thank you for being the champion for Final Five voting, but also for the investment in a healthy democracy. So now I'm going to turn it back over to you, Peter.
Let's see if we can turn. Well, in closing, we would just like to thank again our program sponsors and virtual sponsors. And they're going to let me do my video there. There I am. Also, if you want more information, you can go to Democracy Found or to LeaderEthics-Wisconsin. Sarah, if you could send us in the link the name of the legislation that is going through Wisconsin. That was one of our questions today. And I'd also like to thank all the program managers behind the scenes, but especially Mike Kalarko of Mike Makes, who oversaw our Facebook live streaming, and Mariah Stadinsky, who has been assisting with event technical support and PowerPoint and graphics. And just to thank all of you who tuned in today to our virtual event for joining us. And we hope you enjoy the program and stay tuned for more events in the future. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.